Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. Are you seeing slides? Slides. When you talk about innovation, it's always important to start to think about the future and to imagine the future. And so what one likes to do often is look at predictions. So let me share a couple of my favorite predictions. In 1895, less than 10 years from Kitty Hawk, Lord Kelvin said, "We'll never be able to fly." And of course, there are many, many predictions about computing. One of my favorites is, computers will weigh less than 1.5 tons. That was out there at the time. That was a huge prediction. My absolute favorite is this one right here. 640K should be enough for anybody. I don't think anybody under 40 even knows what a K of memory is. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how can all these brilliant men be so absolutely wrong? And I think the answer is actually quite simple. A prediction is just an extrapolation. When Bill said 640K should be enough, he was trying to tell his coding team, tight code. You don't need a lot of memory, make it efficient. What he never imagined is that we would have a whole industry around cell phones and we'd want to carry big computers in our pocket where we would carry our life, our music, our videos, our family. And so this is really why innovation is important. Because what innovation does is it changes our perspective, it changes our world, it changes everything. So why are we all talking about disruption today? To me, it all goes back to this. You've all seen the IPCC report. What do we need to do to stay under 1.5 and 2 degrees? It's actually kind of interesting because nobody finishes the sentence, by the end of the century. Every model that they ran, we overshoot 1.5, we overshoot 2, even if we're aggressive. And then with carbon capture technologies, we can get ourselves back down by the end of the century. That's what the report actually says. Drastic action still takes us over 2. Figuratively and literally, our planet is on fire. And we absolutely need to rethink our carbon economy. And the way I think about it is, face it, we use carbon for everything. Energy, fuels, chemicals, your carpet fiber, your yoga pants, your water bottle. We need to stop thinking about carbon as a commodity. We need to start to think that carbon is precious, not just the carbon in a diamond. All carbon is precious. And we need to lock it away. And lock it away and only take it out when we absolutely have to. I would argue that since the levelized cost of electricity are equivalent in renewables and fossils, that it's high time that we stop using carbon, wasting carbon to make electricity. But if we're on a carbon budget, you better reserve some carbon for aviation. It's going to be a really long time before planes fly without fuel. And you need carbon for fuels. And I would also argue that everything in our daily lives that comes from a chemical needs to come from carbon, and we still need to have carbon. So if we put ourselves on a carbon diet, we better reserve carbon for the things we really need it for. And the other thing we need to do is we need to learn to recycle carbon. We need to think of carbon not as a disposable one-use thing. We need to recycle carbon. The reality is, I've been talking about greenhouse gases, but the reason all our cities are polluted is because we're constantly combusting carbon. That's where the particulate emissions come from. We need to change. And the way I think about it is a little bit like this carbon recycling symbol we like to use. We don't just want a green anymore. We want a blue. We want to go beyond green because this is actually the planet we want to live in. This is the planet we have a right to live in. So let me tell you what we do as a company. We recycle carbon. So what LanzaTech does is we have a bacteria that eats carbon monoxide, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide and convert that to ethanol. Just like brewing sugar to make the ethanol that we all had last night, except we start with industrial streams. And instead of letting these become pollution and come out the flue, we capture it, we pump them into our bioreactor, the bacteria eats it and poops out ethanol, which you can use for your cars, and which we've learned to convert to jet fuel so that we can fly on this recycled pollution. Now you're all sitting there going, oh my gosh, this just sounds like science fiction. It's not. It's not science fiction. This is a 16 million gallon a year commercial facility operating in China. It takes a steel mill gas, which comes in that green rack, in that pipe. We compress it and we put it in our bioreactors and we make ethanol. We started this first plant in May of last year, and we've now produced more than 9 million gallons. I don't know about you, but that's a really huge deal. So one thing that I think is important to note as well is this process makes economic sense. At the end of the day, if we're going to change our systems, it can't be without having some economic driver. That's the great way to pull technology along. So this plant was $55 million. If you assume that you pay for the gas at its BTU value, because even though this gas is a waste, the minute you want it, somebody wants to charge you for it, you still pay this back in 3 to 5 years. It works and it makes money. And we're building multiple plants throughout the world. This is at a steel mill. We're building another plant in Europe at an ArcelorMittal steel mill in Belgium. ArcelorMittal is the largest steel company in the world. We are using a refinery off gas, which is hydrogen, CO, and CO2 with Indian oil in India. We're using a ferroalloy gas in South Africa. And these are all commercial facilities that are under construction today. I also show two extremes. The Ametis project is, you don't just have to use industrial gases. If you can use like biomass waste or municipal solid waste and you can gasify them, you can also convert them with this technology. So it's really, really flexible. And we've calculated that if we could access all of these types of waste, we could make on the order of 500 billion gallons of ethanol. Granted, the world does not need 500 billion gallons of ethanol. However, if you think about it, these are pockets of feedstocks you can't move. You're never going to move gases from a steel mill and convert them to something else at another location. But if you can convert these gases or these waste biomass or this trash in a distributed fashion to ethanol, then the ethanol becomes potentially a building block to make other products. The feedstock, I say the feedstock of the future. And what we've done is we've shown we can take this ethanol and convert it to jet fuel. Last year, we flew a commercial flight with Virgin Atlantic from Orlando to Gatwick using originally ethanol made at that steel mill that I pointed out and then converted to jet fuel. So think about it, recycled carbon emissions powering a plane. Ethanol can be converted to ethylene, and anything you can convert from ethylene, which is one of the largest chemicals used today, you can start with ethanol. And so we've worked with partners to take ethanol that's carbon recycled and put it into plastics, into bottles, into other goods, durable goods, trapping that carbon forever in these goods that you use. So really believe that there is a path for some type of ethanol economy. One of the messages that I want to leave you here, I wanted to show you what we're doing only as an example. There's lots of other people doing these types of things. But what I really want you to get out of my conversation with you today is what it takes to be able to do something like this. Because while we all talk about climate change and doing something, there's this tremendous impatience. And these things take time. So just to give you perspective, we built 4 different demonstration plants before we built the commercial. We wanted to have enough data to have confidence to scale. 2 points, always make a line. And when you scale to something really big, you don't want to find out it doesn't quite work like you imagined. We've been around for 14 years, and we've raised over $340 million of capital to get to this point. It's actually not so easy. And so it takes also a really dedicated team and really dedicated partners. A company like mine, small little startup, can't succeed without the support of governments and without the support and the knowledge that comes with these big industries. I can't disrupt the carbon system unless the big oil and chemical companies want to help me do that. And I think that's an important message. We have to work together to be successful. In our industry, because it takes all of this, we like to say we're crossing the valley of death. When you're commercializing a new technology, that's what we like to say. My husband likes to say, Jennifer, you're actually crossing the Grand Canyon of death. And it's true. And the reason for that is because a lot of new technologies get stuck at the bottom. It takes, every time you build something bigger to prove your technology, it takes more and more and more funding. And it also takes more and more time, so you have to survive that. I use really big compressors, and it takes me 14 months to get a really big compressor. So from the day I decide I want to build a demo or a commercial plant, it's going to take 14 months just from the day I've designed it. It takes time. I always like to say people want to be first to be second. So after you build the first one, then you start to build others. I showed you we're building others because we built that first one that proved the point. For a company like ours, we need to build a lot of seconds because if we don't survive. At some point, we have to stop being venture capital funded or strategic capital funded. We have to be self-sufficient. And so this technology diffusion is actually very, very important. The other reason I want to talk about technology diffusion is because I also want you to think about how new ideas spread. The reality is that new technologies don't spread linearly, they spread exponentially. And it's very hard for people to imagine exponentially, which is why we get stuck on, oh my God, this will never work. Because you get to the point where you build one, and then you build 2 from that one, and then 4. And so I want you to look at an example of that. Solar. Not too long ago, people were laughing about solar. People were saying, we're never going to build a lot of solar capacity. Stop wasting your time, stop wasting your money. There's articles here from the past decade. And yet in 2018, 60% of net additions were solar or wind. This is how it works. You go from nothing to something. But more importantly, the reason this happens is because the more you build, the more the costs come down. And so then you can build more and more and more. And you also enable the infrastructure, the factories, and all of the things that enable you to build more. So think about a future where what we're doing today grows exponentially, not linearly. Moore's law is how they talk about it in electronics, but Moore's law applies to all technology, all technology. And then what happens is crazy things happen. You start to see solar and a model that works differently, a model that works in a distributed fashion as opposed to a centralized fashion, which is how we distributed energy. And when you think about this, you think, well, this empowers people at night to be able to see. That's not all it empowers. There are entrepreneurs in India and Africa who use a solar build-out to power the cell phones of a community that doesn't have access to electricity and therefore doesn't have access to cell phones. And why do we care? Because a cell phone is empowering. You can do banking transactions. You can check whether you can take your food to market. A cell phone is so powerful that according to the UN, there are more cell phones in the world today than there are flush toilets. And these distributed models empower that. And I tell you this because I think it's important for us to remember that if we do disrupt, if we do change the system, we cannot change it by trying to build a bigger box. You have to step out of the box. You have to create a very different situation. I go back to climate change for a second. Everybody tells me, oh, this is so hard. This is something we can't solve. I assure you we can solve it. I grew up in Los Angeles, where I wasn't allowed to go out and play as a child because pollution was so bad that the teachers would not always allow children on bad days to go out and play during recess. But we fixed that. I grew up in a time where rivers were so polluted, they would literally go up in flames. But we changed that. And many of us grew up in a time where the ozone layer was breaking down to the point where we were talking about giving babies glasses, sunglasses, so their eyes wouldn't be damaged by this. But we worked together as a global economy to change that. And we don't have an ozone problem. But to do all of this, we need innovation. We need new ideas. We need regulation. The reality is when the Cuyahoga River went up in flames, the EPA was founded. People were just up in arms. And we need strong will. We need people who really, really want to do this. But for me, and the reason I started this presentation, Carbon Smart, is because I believe that carbon needs to be part of how we think about life, our carbon footprint. Just like we put on a seatbelt every time we get in a car, everything we do every day, we should ask ourselves, what is its carbon footprint? We talk a lot about aviation. Aviation is 2% of our global carbon footprint. Apparel is 8%. So you have to ask yourself what choices you're making every single day. And so what I want is to create a world where you can go into a store or you can choose a flight by what its carbon footprint is. I don't want you to stop flying. I want you to say, which plane do I take? Which one has the right carbon footprint? We can do this as consumers. We've always done this as consumers. Fair trade coffee is a choice that we all make, organic milk. You have the power to impact our carbon footprint. In August, the Oak Glacier was downgraded from being a glacier. If you're Monty Python, you would say that's an ex-glacier. But anyways, I guess it wasn't meant to be amusing, and so they put a tombstone there. But what they said was, we know what's happening. We know what's happening. Now we need to figure out what to do. And so for me, I feel like we live in an amazing, exciting time. If you're a scientist or an engineer, everything you do matters. If you're an individual, every choice you make matters. And if you're in government, every decision and planning that you're doing and the rate at which you do it matters. We can change this trajectory by working together. A long time ago, I used to start my presentations by saying, I dream of a day when a steel mill can not only produce the steel for a plane, but also the fuel that goes in that plane. Last year, I flew on a plane where the fuel started life as a waste gas in a steel mill. And next year, you'll be able to buy products that started life in a steel mill. We can do this. We can all do this. We just have to want to do this. Thank you.